So after this fascinating talk by Carl, where we very much explore the impact of technology on our human level, on our individual level, we now go a level up to the society. And I have a fascinating woman with me here on stage, Mila Aliana. Mila, welcome to Salz 21.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I read on your profile your job title, which I think is very interesting. Chief Weaver and Connector, Guardian of the Life Collective. Can you tell me a bit more what this is about and what your role means?
So the label was given to me rather than for me to assign, because often I don't really have a label. So in the context of the Chief Weaver, it's more about weaving patterns, so understanding how patterns work in complex systems, and weaving not only people, projects, and planet, but also time, and also opportunities. So really, but that is not from just the head, it's using my whole being. And this is coming from a very indigenous background, a traditional ancestral wisdom that I have seen and enjoyed, and also have the honor to spend time with indigenous elders across the world to really understand that this is something that we all inhabit. Actually, we all have these qualities. You don't really need technology, like with the, I think Carl mentioned about the Colombian Kogis that sits up in the mountain in Colombia and has been around for 10,000 years old, has not been colonialized by any Western society, and they do assign sort of shamans or wisdom keepers from very, very young and put them in caves. But they have the ability to really sense into the whole being, and it's accessing many senses, not just the six senses. So for some reason I have that gift that I can feel, and it's not a logical thing, but there is my logic, my emotional, my embodiment that brings information, and that information is very much through the senses. As I said in the stage yesterday, what I've learned that the neuroscience have caught up with indigeneity wisdom is that a lot of the information comes from our gut and from our heart that informs the head, more signals to the head than the head going down. Yet, in many societies today, in the modern societies, we elevate the intelligence. And I don't say intelligence isn't necessary, but we're focusing too much on intelligence and almost minimizing all of the different qualities that we haven't really looked into, because we are seriously still at infancy, and there's a deep humility to understand we've only been here 200,000 years as a Homo sapiens against 13 point whatever billion years of universe and 4.5 billion planet existence. So why do we think we know better than the wisdom of the universe to just this little infant that's still learning? So, you know, it's like having an infant getting access to toys, but we don't even know ourselves, our consciousness, and the toys is evolving a lot more rapidly than humanity itself.
And because you did mention there is a shift in focus when it comes to our intelligence. I mean, AI, artificial intelligence, I guess, is also doing, it's contributing to that. But then what should be the role of our intelligence? So how should we use it in our everyday life?
So here's the thing. The first answer is I don't know.
Okay.
I'm deep humility. I'm not the expert. There's a lot of experts here in the room. So my sense is, I had this conversation with a few of us yesterday, my sense is that we have a very unique role on this planet, on this universe. We haven't yet achieved to understand as society what that is, because we are the only species in nature. We are nature. We are part of nature. Nature had to evolve to arrive at us, right? The dinosaurs and everything else, the oxygen, everything else that we see now had to be in our indigenous world. They are our relations, because we only came about after all of those existed for billions of years and evolved. And we started evolving as Homo sapiens 200,000 years ago, according to history. So what is our unique role? Every single species on this planet is evolving in creative ways, but has a unique role. Carl demonstrated the lobster earlier, right? Very different to ours. Every single species, and even species we haven't come across yet that still exists in this planet and beyond, has a role. And humans, from my perspective, from my biased reality, has a unique role of ingenuity and creativity that no other species have. It has ingenuity, creativity, and very high level consciousness. So what is it for? So that's a question that I'm constantly asking. And the indigenous have a deep wisdom. They understand that this needs to evolve. None of us know, but we have to do this in a collective. It's not some individuals in a lab that decides for the rest of humanity, past, present, and future generations. And this is something that I think that I invite everyone to really go on a journey of potentiality, not just problem solving. What is it? Why are we here? Like, what is the creativity and ingenuity serves the greater whole? Because we are part of that greater whole.
And on your journey of identifying this question and also trying to find answers, what has been your thought so far? Like, if I ask you currently or looking back, what do you think our role is? It's considering that we have ingenuity and creativity, which no other species have. So where do you currently stand? Not saying that's the final answer or the answer, but currently where you are at the moment.
Well, to answer that question, I need to basically say that I stand for all life forms, not just humanity. Because humanity cannot exist with all the other life forms. Humanity is just a species of nature and life. We are not the controlling dominant factor. We are infinitesimal against everything, all the species around us that's evolved before us and beyond us. So for me, our role as humanity with our creative ingenuity is about raising potential. Not only raising potential of ourselves, but raising potential for life and nature. And I don't know what that looks like, because our creativity is beyond measure. Look at all of the inventions that happened in over the 200,000 years that Homo sapiens existed. It only went exponential in the last 10,000 years, which is the wheel, agriculture. And look at AI, look at all the technology, all the amazing, medical, health, all of the things that we are discovering with our ingenuity and creativity. One physicist, Christoph, yesterday talked to me about that we can calculate billions of years from now what the star or the distance. That's amazing, but what is it for, right? So there must be something deeply of essence why humans are on this earth. And I think it's about raising potential of life and nature to an evolution that we are part of. Yet we haven't discovered that, to my deep biased reality, because we're still in our infancy.
And what do we need to do to get there to discover is, or is this a question that we will never be able to answer because it's also so personal that maybe we as a society can't even agree on one answer?
Well, I think Carl really mentioned that about we need to really understand what is humanity, but not just from an internal self-interest way. There's all of this deep work about internal work, but that internal work doesn't get developed unless you are wiring with another person or society. And from my understanding from neuroscience, the only way we evolve and change is through repeated habitual patterns, from moving from an old neural network or old social construct that no longer serve us, to then rewire new habits, new consciousness. But that can only be done not only repeatedly, but in interaction with community, with society. So as an example, if you go to addiction rehab, for any kind of addiction, including addiction to your mobile phone, you can probably get well as you can be, and then leave the rehab, But then if you go into a society or a community that just rewires the same old habit patterns, you will go back very easily because that neural pattern still exists. It never gets eroded. But you need to create enough interactions with others to go on this journey to rewire your neural patterns in such a way that it becomes the dominant part of your brain. And there's like hundreds of biases, hundreds of ways we see reality and perception. So how do we do this is in society, is as a collective. And this is what I said to you earlier, what I see are the faces of the Western world. I'm literally one of the non-white female here. Where are all the other voices of wisdom and insights and intelligence from the global south, from the marginalized communities? And I have worked with slums in international project development programs. And the people in the slums are more resourceful because they don't have anything. They have so much limitations. And the resourcefulness is off the charts. And I come from a family that came from nothing also. So I'm very privileged because of what they had to do to get to where now I am. I'm having privilege to be here. So my understanding is we need all the voices in the system, including opposing ones. Because what that brings us to do, if we can sit with the discomfort of our ego being challenged by an opposing view, we will find together what Stuart Kaufman, who's a scientist on complex sciences, the adjacent possibilities. So there's something on the parapet that none of us is seeing until we all come together and sit with discomfort. And in creativity, it's called creative tension. And that brings flow. And I've been in those processes with teams where we just, go into this flow of ideas, and suddenly it just flow in a way that you feel that we're getting to access something that none of us have seen. Not one single person, but we've come to an idea or concept or perspective like what Carl showed us with some of his techniques. And we probably can use technology to enable that. And that gives such a release of surrendering to something that is emergent. And I think this is part of also from society to be comfortable with uncertainty. If you live in the global south, you have to live with survival. And uncertainty is every day. Somebody would drop dead the next day. You have to walk 9 miles to get food and water. So there's a certain resiliency. And if you talk to ancestral wisdom of indigeneity, they have the same resilience. And because they can access certain senses that we haven't in the modern world, or probably disconnected from. Because the one thing that I see that we have an issue in the modern world is disconnection. We are not connected to our community, to our kin, even from birth, and we're not connected to our environment. We need to go out in nature to connect to it. And this is again transdisciplinary sciences that have just come out with that, and yet the indigenous, the ancestral wisdom and global south already know that because we live it day by day. And her name, if you want to look at it, is Dr. Darcia Navarez. She's a professor emeritus from Notre Dame University. And she talks about this, that we are an evolving nest. And the disconnection is really impacting all aspects of our life, including our creativity and innovation.
And then is the solution to become more connected to one another and as also to our environment, is it to switch off our phones, to stop using laptops? Because that's always the dilemma, right? On the one hand side, internet, being connected helps us to connect across borders easily, to stay in touch with friends or family that might live far away. But at the same time, it hinders us in staying connected maybe with people that are close to us. So how would you say, what do we need to do?
Well, that's an answer that is very contextual, because this is the thing that I have a problem with. We think there is a blueprint, and yet life doesn't have a blueprint. It's constantly experimenting and constant emergent. So it's highly contextual. What is happening here in Salzburg is going to be very different in Africa or in my country, what works for them, or in Mexico. It's almost like we're trying so much to control everyone for a quick solution. But this is a long-term evolution, and almost what this is my bias reality is almost like we want a shortcut. The pain of understanding uncertainty and getting used to that and getting access to our deep, deep gifts, that takes time, that takes evolution. And in my culture, I am doing my part beyond my lifetime. I'm not interested to have my name and foundation or whatever because it's beyond my lifetime. And if you talk to real indigenous peoples, we work beyond our lifetime. So we're not attached to it. We're not attached to our ego, our celebrity. You know, it's a collective effort, and it's contextual. What happens in Colombia, what happens in Indonesia or Mexico or Africa or the Western world is going to be highly, highly contextual to the local culture, to the local wisdom. And I believe that how do you hold the space for that local wisdom to rise up to their own potential, to their own self-agency, and to their own destiny? Because this is not an answer that exists in one person or a few people. It needs to exist in our collective.
If you bring artificial intelligence into the topic, what I find really interesting is that AI is almost a mirror to us of our society, and I think it's become very obvious around 2018-19 when there have been projects around biases in data, and especially on gender and skin color. I don't know her full name, but her name is Joyce from MIT, a PhD student, who has a fantastic TED Talk on gender shades. And she basically tested computer vision, facial recognition software, and it worked fantastic on her lighter skin friends. But she was dark skinned, and she had to put on a white mask, otherwise the system wouldn't have recognized her face. And of course, those systems have evolved, right? It's been 5 years, but it was thanks to her and other individuals that large companies became aware of this. Before, there was no awareness. And the same as there's this platform which I use consistently is called DeepL, which I'm pretty sure you know as well. The translation software works really well in many languages. But if you, for example, put in the sentence, the nurse and the doctor in English, and you translate it to German, that you get the sentence, der Doktor und die Krankenschwester, but not die Ärztin und der Krankenpfleger. So this, because it has been fed with texts that were written many years ago, and out of, let's say, 100 texts, 90 times it was used the male version, right, of doctor being a man and not a woman. And somehow, now all of a sudden we have AI holding this mirror in front of us. How can we, because we mentioned earlier as well, society, AI is very much Western driven, also because a lot of, especially indigenous societies, also if we look at Central and Eastern Africa, the access to internet is not even there, so they're not part of that conversation. No. What more do we need to do in order to make sure that there's also an awareness for us in the West about the responsibility that we have, that we talk about the collective society globally and not just what we envision outside or see as our society?
Well, I have this mental note in my head when I talk about society is how do you hold the space or create the space for empowerment that plays locally, acts locally, and collaborate regionally and learn globally? Because I think it's not an answer that anyone can come to. If they do, I would challenge them of arrogance. I'm sorry, that's my biased reality. Because we need to come in here with deep humility. We ourselves don't even know ourselves. We talk about compassion. We were talking about compassion yesterday. The only way I can give you compassion and forgiveness if I do compassion and forgiveness. And boy, if you come into my head, there's like, you're not good enough, you're an imposter, you're wrong, you know. So how are we doing that? Because we're projecting a lot of our inner work or lack of inner work to our friends. and our, the people around us. That's what I see, and this is my biased reality of working a lot and in the work as well as out of work and learning from my elders. And fundamentally, what I understand is when we go into a culture, it's moving away from blame, because there's a recent research by Birnbaum about blame is the inverse relationship to accountability. And that's what I see, right? So we create this innovation, but where is the accountability of the impact on others? And so often I bring empty chairs into the conversation. Who are these empty chairs? Who are the voices that needs to be here? So when we're talking about compassion, when we're talking about AI, any kind of form of innovation, what are the voices? I do this at board level, right? What are the voices here? If this was your future grandchildren or future generation or nature or some of the key actors, then your decision making would be very different. And fundamentally, how do you design for life? How do you design that is aligned to the wisdom that is already there and exists, not the wisdom of humanity alone? Because that wisdom has existed for billions of years before we even came into existence. So this is the deep humility that I'm inviting people to come to.
And I think that's a great segue, because we're talking about society. The conversation has been between you and I so far. So we want to open the floor to all of you, extend it, so to say, and just wanted to understand, what thoughts you have, what comments and questions you have. How do you see as well, the impact of AI on our society? And have you yourself maybe experienced that while we are so much focused on, technology has become such an obvious part of our life, but has it maybe triggered in you also the question, well then, if I'm outsourcing so much of my competences, what is it that still makes me or keeps me human? So just curious to see what thoughts you have. If anyone wants to share. Please, we have two. Christina, in the front row. Okay.
When you say design for life, do you think that these eco-friendly kind of movements that try to create conditions for our life, which are kind of integrated with ecology of local environments, are sufficient, or should we somehow go beyond that?
The easiest answer is I don't know. And the kind of larger answer, from what my understanding of biomimicry, life in the definition of biomimicry co-creates condition for more life, right? So if we are not doing that, just alignment to that wisdom and have criteria in our innovations, then we are going against life itself and nature, which will eventually make us extinct, where we are on that edge at the moment, right? So we have had 10,000 years of exponential growth in our technology because of our ingenuity and creativity. Which part of that creation is actually aligned to how life regenerates itself, how life creates constantly conditions for more life, how life experiments all the time with deep humility. And a lot of creation in life and nature is by accident. So there's this illusion of control that humanity has, an illusion of separation that creates so much non-beneficial impact in society. And that's why we need those empty chairs to have voices when we start creating something, whatever it is. It doesn't need to be technology. And I don't think that it's just ecological, because I think it needs all the different versions. I'll give you an example that I had this conversation with a Colombian Kogi elder who's 80, 90 years old. The Kogis have never been influenced by the Western society for the last 10,000 years. It's very intact. And he said to me what the prophecy is from their world, and also I've seen this prophecy in other indigenous cultures, is that the modern wisdom, they're not against technology, they're not against sciences, needs to come together with all the voices of the system but also come together with the ancestral wisdom. It's not just traditional and indigenous wisdom, but also the global south in many rural communities, including even in Scandinavia. When I was in Sweden, there's a village that's 500 years old that has not changed, learned so much with their environment, with their community. So how are we bringing those wisdom in? Not just knowledge and intelligence, but the wisdom. And what they call the third world is the marrying of the modern wisdom, the science, the technology, and others, with ancestral wisdom. And what glues them together is, funnily enough, what the elders have said, is art. Because art is the expression of culture and the expression of creativity. And then one creates a living lab to experiment how that would work at local levels, because every local has its own wisdom, has its own environment, it has its own context.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you for great speech and your discussion. Your questions and your answers are super good. I learned a lot, and maybe it's very difficult to add something very more important. But please, that I would like to share my perception, what I hear.
Yeah.
It's very renewed. We know the reason that we are as a human not stayed the starting point of life on the earth. Now we don't know what is a crisis, because the crisis probably human brings on the earth, and before everything was stable and like that. But relation to touching the relation between the human and the machine, I would like to ask you how we can collaborate as individuals among us, if we, and maybe this is the truth, and it's a question, second part of the question, the think is quicker than technology. If you asked us what is the more humanistic feature now in front of the technology, I could answer the think finally, of course, think in the deep sense, engaging main sensors, our sensitivity. And why think? And if you use the thinking, we can not afraid of technology, and we probably, this is a question for you, if we can collaborate, and on which way among us to shape the artificial intelligence or approach the artificial intelligence finally. Thank you.
So the first thing that came into my mind is go slow to go fast. Go slow to go progress. Go slow to move, to go forward. Because I think we tend to go and hurry because there's a deep need to construct, to control, to create. But we do not take the time to take a step back and integrate feedback loops to understand what are the assumptions we're making in the design, and what are those assumptions informed by what cultural construct and social construct that no longer serves us. So it's like being with a 1-year-old and then suddenly having all your toys, you have no barriers, no limitations. But when you're 5 and when you're 10, that behavior and that way of life and way of being is no longer useful to you. You do have limitations because you work with other people, you work within an environment, and just like nature, it has limited resources. And yet we think it is abundant if we are able to learn how to collaborate and manage it together. Similar to our intelligence, we also need to have limited constraints to it, because we don't understand ourselves yet well enough to understand what unintended consequences can emerge, and it's already too late by the time it's manifested in the world, in reality, because we can't see that. So my invitation is, obviously we can't have like a global conversation every time we have innovation, is what is the consciousness that you need to bring into that conversation between the stimuli and the response for you to have choice of what you're going to co-create, what you're going to collaborate on. So it comes down to go slow, to go fast, go slow to go forward.
Great motto. Thank you. I think something that we all can incorporate in our everyday lives. Any other comments? Please.
Hello. Well, I wanted to ask you something, Mila. A couple of days ago, we were talking about indigenous technology. Digital technology is actually super recent in regards of the time humanity has been here. And it has overwhelmed any other kind of technology. Like we went all digital and we forgot about magical technology, just to embrace the concept, right? Magic. No, I'm not talking about real magic. So I was wondering, like the example we talked about, the Mayan pyramids being actual particle accelerators. I was thinking, what kind of ancestral technology would you think we need to recover that would push humanity forward in this actual condition?
So the answer to that is depends. It depends on context, because everything is a very interdependent network of activities past, present, and future. So what is it needed for that particular context? So there's many, many ancestral technology that's available, and there are many scientists that have actually produced research. I know some of them, and they're amazing, from social anthropologists to physicists to participant video making. And it's very interesting because there's one tribe that actually have created a way, because of the environment they're in, they've created a way to cook something in a desert. And it's like they cover it in stone with the food and they leave it for a couple of hours. And then only recently the science has demonstrated why that is. All the different biological chemistry and all of that. Now, a lot of the indigenous already knows this because they live as nature. They don't live as humans. They live as nature. They work with nature with its cyclical symbiosis way, and they are what we call the guardians of life. Mm-hmm. They're not just guardians and stewards. They work to enhance the environment, to raise the potentiality of the environment and that impacts the evolution of the humanity. It's a direct interconnection. When everything is interdependent, everything is connected. And I think I remember, and I'm going to bastardize David Bohm's quote, something about the ability to see in wholeness, as I said. When I see patterns, I see wholes. I see the sum of its parts. Mm-hmm. When you look at a flower, if you then go into this reductionist way of analyzing to then create a new model, you look at the petal, you look at the stem, but the flower isn't the petal or the stem. There is something that connects them that becomes a flower, and that is the wholeness. And if we are able to arrive at this wholeness type of thinking, the coherence that we bring to reality, this is what David Bohm's quote, will give us coherence with that reality. So there is that, again, go slow to go fast, the mindfulness that this, what we see, and that's why I always say this is my biased reality. Mm-hmm. What we see as reality in the world is not necessarily reality. There's 8 billion people and beyond, and there's many realities. And so we need to design for wholeness, design with wisdom that's already there. Why create something that already is around and existent? So very much to Eddie's point, there are many ancestral technology. I can't name them all, but there are many academic paper that have actually produced this. Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you. Sorry, could you please repeat this with, just so that everybody in the audience can...
Well, sorry. Mila has mentioned David Bohm, and his book was called Wholeness and Implicate Order.
Yes, correct.
And he tried to find actually a language which will express the fluidity of everything. He called it real mode. Yeah. And he has pointed to some indigenous people who are not reifying reality, they are just trying to express this fluid nature of everything. And still he wanted to show that behind the wholeness, there is a certain order that we are trying to discover.
And here's the thing, chaos has an integrated order.
Yeah, so
We are just really uncomfortable with chaos because we are wired for flight, fright,
well,
fight. So how do we organize ourselves to understand, to be able to surf uncertainty and emerge in a playful, curious way? And I think this is the way forward to move to that playfulness, curious wonder that has not existed for a while. Children are very, very good at doing this, right? So in that, I would invite playfulness also as part of that. Yeah.
yes. So David Bohm was one of the most famous physicists of 20th century. By mistake, he was not given Nobel Prize, I think.
Thanks. Yeah.
It's worth online what you said, and we can get it. That connection, real connection, is not through the telecommunication system and smartphone, but we need to discover the ways, the modes of connectivity among us. It's the hard work in front of us. I don't know what we find, but it's a good request for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll demonstrate to you all connection and communication in a way that doesn't need digital. Each one of you have the gift. So I'm going to do two hand movements, and let me know which one means what. So this is the first one, and this is the second one. Which one means what? Which one was the one that said stop? We didn't communicate digitally, but all of you got it. What was the second one? That is a simple. We're making it too complicated. Find the simplicity across the complexity. That's what indigenous peoples do. They get the complexity and find the simplicity because we're humans. We don't have this massive organic brain that is the whole collective, but we can tap into it.
Mila, as a final question from my side, through your work of indigenous people, what is one thing that you have learned from them that you've incorporated in your life that had a huge impact? Is there anything specific that you can share with us that maybe we can then also, potentially look at incorporating in our everyday life?
One of the things that I've really learned is, hello, my relations. Everything, each one of you are mirrors of me. Everything that is happening to me are mirrors of me. That's how I learn. That's the feedback loop that I often don't see in many projects, many innovations, many groups. That feedback loop seems to be like a resistance to really look at yourself. And I think Carl talked about being able to see yourself. And that is some kind of, I don't know what it is. I think it's a cultural construct of not wanting to learn deeply about oneself, because it's painful sometimes to see yourself. And not only to see yourself, how you design, how you innovate, how you create, but what assumptions are you making in that design, in that behavior, and what cultural construct informs that assumption. We don't go that triple loop learning, and again, this is scientifically based, and that triple loop learning is missing in all of our society of how we actually work and behave towards each other and behave towards our environment. Because then we would notice that was this cultural construct when I was 1 year old. I'm 10 years old now. Does that actually serve us any longer? This whole focus of control, this whole focus of separation, this whole focus of everything needs to be perfect. And everybody doesn't want to be in failure, but failure is learning. Like when you learned how to ride a bike, did you learn how to ride a bike immediately because you're so perfect? And yet we ask startups, we ask people, students, not to fail. But failure is learning, it's part of life. Even nature does that. It fails many attempts. And it needs that time for evolution to basically dig deep into mastery, which take, according to scientific research, it takes 10,000 iterations or 10,000 iterations or 10 years. So why do we go so fast, right? It's just shortcuts, yet we are designed to go slow in order to go fast. There's a wisdom that we're not tapping into, which each one of us has. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I love that you mentioned at the beginning that creativity is a core part of us humans, because later today at 4:30 we actually have a conversation with artists on the role of AI and the influence of creativity. Mila, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation, and thank you to all of you for being part of it. We continue at 12:30. Thank you. Thanks, Mila. Sorry. Thanks a lot.